People that host their home on Airbnb, what has been your worst experience with a guest? Story 1. A friend of mine rented to a girl who was convinced that there were cameras hidden all around the unit. She dismantled the lighting fixtures, picture frames, medicine cabinets, remote controls, etc. On a side note, my sister and her fiancé stayed in an Airbnb that really was full of cameras. They found out because the owner texted them almost immediately after they exited the seemingly private indoor hot tub and not yet returned the lid, before they even changed out of swimwear, which they luckily chose to wear. She was obviously immediately horrified because they were clearly watching them. Airbnb apologized profusely and gave them their money back, along with providing a free hotel their last couple days of the trip. But still, edit, they found a lot of cameras throughout the house, including the bathrooms and bedrooms. They never thought to even look. It was the first time they'd ever vacationed without real adults. I have a story along these lines, though not Airbnb. This happened about 35 years ago. I had a friend who was a member of the church. He and his girlfriend got a place to live, a converted shed that was offered to them by one of the ladies that went to their church, also a devout Christian. The shed adjoined to her home, but had been fitted out with a bedroom, toilet, kitchen, etc. Well, they were there for a couple of months. They had decided to wait until they were married, but in the end could not help themselves, and one night had the boning for the first time. The next day, the lady owner told them they had to leave because they had boned before marriage, and that was a sin. They said okay, but then the guy got curious. They'd only done it for the first time last night. How did she know? After examining everything, they discovered she'd placed a microphone under the bed. I told him to call the police, but he didn't want to cause trouble, so they left. And they did get married a few months later, and as far as I know, they're still married today. I found it hilarious that she considered premarital boning a sin, but listening to someone in their bedroom was fine. The movie License to Wed has a plotline identical to this. I thought it was contrived, but I guess this actually happens. Story 2. Not my story, but a friend of mine. He has an apartment in London, an urban area with dense houses and population. The apartment he hosted has this window facing Main Street, which people tend to assume is non-see-through, but it's not. So the guy who stayed in it decided to sit in front of that naked and had a few beers, overlooking the great view. He must have fallen asleep or something, and everyone passing by the road just had to see this poor creature. It was all on Snapchat at the time, I recall. The area I refer to is in the context of where the apartment is and not the whole of London in general. In that sense, the population per square kilometer here would be extremely high. He sat on a couch right in front of the see-through window to have his beers, just like anyone would do. The window used to be non-see-through until it had sustained some damage from a nearby construction site, forcing them to repair immediately without thoroughly checking. This is where the whole new feature of see-through was born. I kinda like that guy's style though. Plot twist, he knew exactly what he was doing, and it was just some weird kinky thing. Yeah, no way he wouldn't instantly notice his mistake upon the first bypasser staring back at him. Story 3. A bit late to the party, but I have two. One dude stole my trimmer. This other guy took the cake though. When I took him the second key to the apartment that his mother needed, he opened the door slightly ajar and only extended his hand, palm facing up, to receive the key. Didn't want to shake my hand. Sent me messages complaining to me that the drawers in the bathroom were full of personal stuff. One was full of items that we purposefully leave for guests to use, including new pads, soaps, toothbrushes. He was annoyed by this and said, I'll just move this to one of the bedside tables in the master bedroom, shall I? Which is also full anyway. There we leave blocks and pens for guests to use, as well as reading material like The Economist or Guides to the City. This also annoyed him. He also complained about food that we leave for guests to partake in and be welcomed by. Upon leaving, Guy leaves a massive scathing review, including hot takes like the linens and pots being worn out and needing replacement. They're not, and they don't. They're also top of the line. Says the apartment was dirty upon entering. It wasn't. It was thoroughly cleaned before his arrival, as it is before every guest's arrival. He concludes by complaining the taxi ripped him off. I'm guessing the insinuation is that I was in cahoots with the taxi company? I don't know. His mother was nice, though. I often wonder how parents who give birth to idiots feel about those idiots. I totally don't get this. Do they get a discount for complaining to Airbnb or something? Even Karens usually have a motive. Yes, they do. Airbnb likely gave them some sort of % off discount for their next stay somewhere. Soap and toothpaste provided? Free snacks? Your place sounds great. Story 4. I'm embarrassed to say that I was not the host in this story. Me and my mate went out on a pub crawl in Prague during our gap year. I don't enjoy clubbing, and the last venue on the crawl was a club, so I cut slightly earlier than my mate. Around 1 a.m., I got back into our apartment and went to bed. I was woken up by my friend at 4 a.m., and the entire kitchen was flooded. Not even exaggerating, there was like a freaking inch of water lining the floor, spewing rapidly out of a broken overhead pipe. I asked him what the frick happened, and he claimed he had woken up standing in it. Being unfamiliar with the house, I didn't know where the choke point in the pipe was to cut off. We called the guy who owned the place, which was painstakingly slow given the time. We managed to get through to a family member, who then contacted him. He arrived about 15 minutes later, in which time the water issue had become even worse. We had sealed off the room using a heap of towels to minimize the water leaving the kitchen, as it had tile floors, while the rest of the house was hardwood, but this made it accumulate to about ankle height. The kitchen also had a sunken floor. Up until about 6 or 7, we were using pots to clear the indoor swimming pool from what used to be the kitchen. It didn't look like it had done a horrendous amount of damage once we were finished, but I imagine the water seeped through the floor and into the walls, causing all sorts of damage. What makes it worse is that it was a third-floor apartment. What a nightmare. How did the host respond to that? Hopefully he had insurance for such a serious issue. Did anybody else gasp audibly at the phrase, "tried to do a pull-up"? Story 5. Not a host, but a guest. We stayed in a carriage house that was split into 2 apartments in Savannah. The host was the most wonderful southern personality I've ever encountered. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to a loud banging noise, like someone trying to break down a door. It got loud and louder, and eventually sounded violent. This went on for 20 minutes before my girlfriend got out of bed and politely asked the neighboring guests to be quiet. They remained quiet for another 20 minutes, and then they were at it again, this time much louder. Drunkenly, they locked themselves out and decided that breaking the door down was their only option. The next morning, when we left, the deadbolt was knocked out, the entire door frame was stripped off, and the door was smashed to bits. We felt so bad for the host. It was going into a holiday, and she had to cancel the next guest's stay because of the damage. Stupid drunk college kids. Oh my god, this reminded me of my landlord in Savannah. I rented the top part of a carriage house, and the property was sold 6 months into my year lease. My new landlord was a perv. He would go into the bottom part of the carriage house, which was more like a garage-type area, and look up through the floorboards to see what I was doing. He also regularly went into my apartment while I was gone and stole my underwear. I know it was him because I found his hiding place below in the garage area. Freaking perv. I'd have spilt some boiling water onto the floor. Story 6. Rented out a group of 4 girls. Turns out they were going partying every day during their stay. I get called one day at 5 a.m. It's the guard from my building telling me there's a passed-out girl in the lobby's couch, puking and peeing herself. None of her friends had gone back to help her. Ruined the couch, obviously. The next day they sent me a message again. Another one of the girls had sprinted to the building stairs and also peed herself. I was a messy drunk for 4 years at college and never peed myself. None of my friends did either. What the frick were they doing that meant they were peeing themselves so much? Do some freaking Kegels, ladies. I worked as a bartender in a beer-only bar for a few weeks. Lousy pay for 60 hours a week. A woman was on her first day, and she was drinking porters and stouts with a high alcohol content all night. She had at least 6 or 8 beers. The girl was making out with the date, and suddenly she passes out and pees herself. We had to clean that up and give her alcohol to smell to wake her up. It was a mess, and she was like 35. I worked at a bar, and there was a couple in their 30s that had been dating for a while who were regulars. They would come in and hang out, but inevitably, after several drinks, they would start making out at the bar almost nonstop. It was really weird, but they were both nice and tipped well, so it just went on like that for a year or 2. It was a small place with a lot of regulars, and most people just got used to it. Story 7. A guy I work with told this story how he hired a maid through a referral from his friend. She was great, apparently, and asked to stay there a couple times when he was gone. After he agreed to let her stay a few weeks when it wasn't being rented, however, she ghosted him. He ended up calling the cops, and they checked up on her. She was there, and although nervous, everything seemed normal. She later got a hold of him and asked to stay longer. He said no, clean it and get out. He comes back randomly to his house at 5 a.m. a few days later to someone sleeping in his downstairs room with dirty dishes and cigarette butts everywhere. Ends up, the maid's a heroin-addicted husband. He has been using it as a flop house and drug den. This guy escorted the husband out by gunpoint, pantsless. The place was trashed downstairs, but apparently perfectly clean upstairs still. His TV was stolen, but the husband brought it back and left it in the driveway, so he didn't get charged with theft. Apparently there was little he could do about the free stay the husband took advantage of. Reminds me of the plot of the movie Parasite, minus the heroin and stolen TV. That movie was fantastic. If you like that, watch Forgotten, 26 Years, and Mom, all Korean movies. Story 8. We are live-in hosts, so we are present while guests stay in our spare room. A guest arrived and immediately announced that they had pooped themselves during their journey. They then marked us down for cleanliness. Mate, you pooped yourself. Also, a guest who found a pair of my flip-flops in a wardrobe that they should not have opened, then pooped all over the bathroom floor, ruining my favorite flip-flops in the process. Also, a guest who went out drinking for 10 hours before checking in, meaning I had to collect them from the taxi, put them in bed in the recovery position, check on them when I woke up for work, then call the taxi company on their behalf when it turned out they'd lost their phone. I really needed that last laugh you just gave me. Thanks. Laughs are hard to come by these days. When you're down, just remember poop-stained pants and an Airbnb. This thread is making me feel a lot better about the time my period started unexpectedly while sleeping on my host's white bed sheets. I at least had the decency to strip the bed and wash out what I could in the sink. Thankfully, the hosts were out of town and, judging from their photos, a lovely lesbian couple. I figured out of anybody they would be the most sympathetic to my plight. Story 9. I worked in a call center that handles some of Airbnb's customer service, so one guest red-rummed 2 people in the host's home and got arrested there. Another guest was from a culture that eats iguanas and barbecued up a 7-year-old girl's pet iguana to serve to the family as thanks for hosting him. Another guest filled a mug with human doo-doo and left it in the host's microwave. You really lose all faith in humanity working in customer service call centers. Editing to add, Airbnb requires photo evidence for all host complaints, and guess who is the first to see them? The initial customer service agent, who may only be on their first or second day taking calls. And the iguana man was forced to pay for both a new barbecue for the family and a replacement iguana. Is it weird that the iguana one is the most shocking to me? Like, how would you not recognize that it's a pet? Assuming it's indoors and in a typical home tank, if you have the money to travel, I'm sure you've seen pet lizards before. And even if they hadn't seen a lizard pet before, it seems like it would be rude in any culture to slaughter your host's livestock without asking. Story 10. Not a host, but I stayed at an Airbnb that rented 2 rooms. I was in bed and heard the other guests, a man and a woman, returning. They're loud and drunk, but nothing crazy. About 10 minutes later, I hear what I thought was them doing it, but then quickly realize it's someone getting hit. The host and I both hear this. The host starts knocking on the door, asking what's going on, and to open the door. The woman opens the door and her lip is split wide open. She's bleeding all down her shirt. The guy is in the room, but runs out with a backpack and leaves. He's taken both of their cell phones and wallets. The police show up and everyone gives statements. They find him walking down the road, and he finds different accommodations at the police station. I slept fine. The room was Harry Potter themed, so I still left 5 stars. May I ask where this Harry Potter themed Airbnb is? The bedroom under the stairs. Story 11. I used to travel a lot for work, and I would put my apartment up on Airbnb while I was away. My apartment has a bunch of closets and drawers, which I used to leave empty and at my guests' disposal. However, there is one closet in the bedroom which I kept locked because it's where I keep my personal belongings. One time, a guest left a bad review saying that the place had no storage space, which I was very confused about until I got home and saw my closet. Dude had tried to open it using brute force. The door was almost pulled off its hinges, and the wood was chipped in some places. The door in question had 2 padlocks, and the perfectly usable closet on the opposite wall was untouched. He was looking for the loot. How dare you deny him? This is why we need mimics. Not gonna work. I always carry a few undead hunter charms on me. Story 12. My partner looks after an Airbnb for his friend. Self-catering only. The house is an 1800s big country house. It's used primarily for large get-togethers and parties. Most guests are great and clean up well to get their deposit back. A group stayed and left the place pretty messy, but we couldn't figure out what the smell was. Turns out they left a full pig in a rubbish bag under the kitchen table. They tried to cook a pig on a spit and basically left its mainly raw corpse under the table. Every toilet was destroyed too. Must have eaten the semi-charred meat on the outside of the pig when drinking without realizing that it was freaking raw. Sorry, Gordon Ramsay. Always find it amusing when people figure out that pigs on a spit aren't exactly really easy to do. They take a very long time to cook through and constantly tending to the fire or gas for like most of the day. I've seen a couple birthdays with a whole pig that didn't turn out properly at all. You can't just throw it under a roaring fire for 2 hours and think it's going to work while you get drunk as 10 men. Story 13. My mom did this. She had some people from out of the country come to stay. They moved the furniture around, swapped and moved mattresses, left a massive pile of dishes in the kitchen. The bathroom was all buggered, and they must have been cooking or smashing clams or oyster shells in and around the barbecue outside. I went over to help my mom out a little after work for a bit, but it was a 2-day minimum cleanup job she had to do. Mom even had to bring in a cleaner lady to help as well. Needless to say, the people who stayed didn't get their deposit back and got a file reported on them. Belp should be a word. I don't know for what, but it should be. It's the name of a town and village in my country. It's not much, but already something. Buggered. Love that word. Story 14. My friend's Airbnb guest taught their kitten to meow once, and then the quietest, sweet, needy cat turned loud and needy. 'Twas a curse that kept on giving long after he left. Too bad he didn't teach the cat to speak English. Missed opportunity. Cats meowing is them trying to speak English, or at least human. Cats raised away from humans don't even meow, apparently. Cats rarely use meows to communicate with each other. Purrs, trills, hisses, and yowls. Yes, along with body language like ears and tail positioning. Story 15. Creepy guy ordering young prostitutes. One came by, knocked on the front door at like 11 at night. Not the correct entrance. After I sent her the correct way, they began to argue loud enough for me to hear upstairs about their sugar daddy arrangement and how he couldn't trust her for whatever reason and asked her to leave, I guess. 30 minutes later, another freaking prostitute knocks on my front door. 1 stars all around. Gross. Agreed. Gross. Story 16. Dude stole my $120 sneakers and broke my TV. You're lucky. At least the guy didn't poop his pants. Yes, I did. How do you pump human souls? Story 17. Before reading this comment, I'd like to explain that it's possibly not safe for work or appropriate to read it if you're sensitive. This is just an honest response to the question posted. I used to own several hostels in Mexico. During the low season, we would create pages for our private rooms.
Click on one of the videos you see on the screen now, or a Karen will sue you.